Welcome back, baseball fans, to another episode of The Top Step. I am Paul Fritchner, along with my co-host Steve Miller, and today at Nationals Park we are joined by a very special guest, none other than Dave Jageler. Dave is the radio play-by-play commentator for the Washington Nationals. Dave has made the doldrums of 2008 and 2009 bearable for us Nats fans, and he cemented 2012 with excitement and enthusiasm when the Nats reached the playoffs for the first time. We are very excited to have him on the show, but first, I am Paul Fritchner, and this is The Top Step.
Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third.
You're killing me, Smalls.
There's no crying in baseball! And the Nationals win it!
That is the worst call I have ever seen!
Eye on the ball, okay?
Fly ball, left field deep!
That guy was a bro.
And his name is Dan Ugla.
Let's go Bucks.
Track! Deep left field! Going! It's gone! Beckett picks it up, tags Posada, and the Florida Marlins are world champions.
Today we are joined by none other than Dave Jageler. We're happy he's on with us today.
Sure, my pleasure. Good to be on with you guys.
So, and thinking about the questions, what I was going to ask you, in a post article from 2012 that they wrote about you, you talked about sitting in the stands in Syracuse and how it didn't do a whole lot for your social life, but how it really helped calling the games and how it helped your baseball career. And Steve and I actually did that this year for our JV baseball games. We wanted to get some experience, and so we'd sit up on the hill and call the JV baseball games. So I was just thinking if you could talk about what that experience did for you and how it helped propel your career.
Well, maybe I shouldn't if you guys are after my job. If you guys are, if you're that serious about it, that's great. I'm always excited to encourage younger announcers. For me, it was a means to an end. I was at a very competitive college program at Syracuse University, and in order to be cleared to go on the air for sportscasts, it was about almost a one-year process. When you were a freshman, you had to work your way up, and the juniors and seniors would critique your work, and that was just to be on the air to do sportscasts. But the creme de la creme, if you will, the thing that everyone wanted to do was to call basketball games and football games.
Yeah.
And in order to be cleared to go on the air, you had to do practice games, and the only way you could do practice games was to sit in the Carrier Dome and broadcast the games in the student section. And those were the seats that we had. So it made for certainly we were very self-conscious doing it, but in a way it was kind of like a fraternity hazing. Although nobody was injured or there wasn't anything crazy, but everybody had to do it, and it was kind of, I think, to show if you were dedicated, if you really wanted to put forth the work and the effort to be cleared, and you had what it takes. If you could broadcast under those conditions and give a quality broadcast, then you maybe had something. So I never had the chance to do it in baseball because Syracuse didn't have a baseball program. It was football, it was basketball, and lacrosse was actually the spring sport that we had to do in the stands. So not as big a crowd for lacrosse games as obviously a big Monday game against Georgetown back in those days. So
of course, yeah.
It was definitely an experience that I'm glad I don't have to do again. In a way, it's funny here at Nationals Park. I don't know if I'm scarred by that experience, but on nights where it's empty here, like if there's a rain delay or a blowout game and the crowd is somewhat emptier than normal, we can hear our broadcast that's being pumped onto the concourse. We can hear it come through our crowd mic into our headsets in a slight delay. So it's almost like you're listening to yourself, and I feel a little self-conscious about it, wondering if maybe the players can hear what I'm saying, and if I'm talking about, hey, the catcher's set up to the outside corner, if the hitter can hear that, and if I'm giving away something. So that's where we are now. I've come a long way from those days in 1989, 1990 to be here in 2014.
So I was wondering, you're talking about broadcasting football and lacrosse and basketball games. The tempo of those sports from baseball is dramatically different. Is it tough for you as a broadcaster to switch between sports like that?
Well, I did a lot more basketball than anything else. I haven't done football in a long time, and I used to do more basketball work in the off season. And when I would get to baseball, I would almost have to force myself to slow down a little bit. It wasn't hard to catch up to the speed of basketball, but as far as baseball, there's long periods of inactivity and then quick action.
Right.
And so you can speed your tempo when there's a double in the gap. There's a lot to talk about as far as picking up the outfielders and the runners, but the course of a game, it's a much slower pace, so you really do have to be conscious about slowing down.
Looking back on it now and knowing what you know and being here to broadcast in a major league stadium and broadcasting to fans now with a bigger fan base, knowing what you know now and looking back at your career, what would be something that you would suggest that you maybe you think you would have done differently, or that would have helped you become even more successful?
I don't have any regrets. I mean, one thing I did was I tried to do everything. I mean, do different sports, talk show work. I wish I'd focused more on the play-by-play early. The one thing that's different for me than a lot of guys who make it to the major leagues from the minor league route, a lot of guys are career minor league baseball announcers, and they work their way up. Maybe they started in A-ball, and they go to AA and AAA in the big leagues. I skipped some steps. I mean, my first baseball action was AAA when I was working in Charlotte, and that's because the flagship station of the Charlotte Knights, the AAA team there, was on our station, and so I got to do some games there. And then my first full-time experience was Pawtucket in 2005, but I had done a lot of talk show work, and I often equate the two, because when you're in a baseball game, it's very conversational. Yeah. So you have to have that ability to interact with a co-host. That's like interacting with with Charlie in the broadcast, and you interact with people. So there's no script. You're able to think on your feet. So I mean, I think the talk show was good training. It took me a little while to get my feet on the ground in 2005 when I was doing baseball full time, just to kind of catch up to the game, get the terminology exactly right, just from not having done a whole lot of it relative to other guys. So, the path I chose was a different one. I thought I was going to do NBA more so than baseball, but it broke differently, and I'm glad it did.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because one thing that you talk about in the same article, as I remember that, is that you and Charlie like to have it be more of a discussion and incorporate both people in the booth, and that it's not just 3 innings of one broadcaster and 3 innings of the next, that you really try to draw the fans in and make it an interactive broadcast and help produce listeners. I mean, that's just one thing that you...
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we still, the game is the thing. I mean, we work in our discussions and our tangents in and around the play-by-play. I mean, when you listen to our broadcast, I'm proud of the fact that you're going to get everything. You're going to get every pitch and everything that happens on the field, but we try to give a little more than that. And if it's just one guy by himself, it doesn't quite have the same effect if you're trying to make yourself laugh as opposed to trying to make somebody else laugh. And that makes the dull games go by a little better. It can turn into kind of a couple of guys sitting around the water cooler or having a beverage and talking baseball. Yeah. But again, the game is still the thing, and we don't do a whole lot of that in one-run games and games that are really close. The times we tend to be a little off the track is when it's 7-0 in the second inning. You've got 2.5 more hours to go.
Yeah. It's been said that baseball is a dying sport, in the sense that baseball used to be where the father and the son would go to a game, and it would be a bonding experience, and they would each talk about the different aspects of the game. But now, as the games have gone on, 2.5 hours, 3 hours long, and kids sit in the stadiums with their smartphones, and the games aren't as exciting as they used to be, and in the sense of kids, the attention span isn't there. They want to see the lacrosse games where it's hits and it's actions and it's goals scored. But baseball is so much of a thinking game that listening to your broadcasts and listening to the games, making it interesting, I think, is something that really helps the sport of baseball to inspire kids and to get them to pay attention to the games and want to come to the games. And
yeah, I appreciate that. One thing that we try to incorporate is that something is always happening. Even if you look at a field and you see 9 guys out there, you may not see a lot happening, but something's happening. Maybe a center fielder takes a couple of steps toward left center, and that can indicate to you how they're going to pitch to the batter. So you try to pick up those little cues and When the ball's put in play, the ball may be hit to the shortstop, but there's more. Really almost all 9 guys on the field have a job and should be moving. So there's a lot more that goes into it. I mean, to me, the way to get kids involved and to get the attention span locked in, and we this is kind of a thing you don't see a lot anymore, is to keep score of the game. When I used to go to games when I was a kid, I would keep score of every game that I went to. Well, if you're keeping score of the game, the worst thing to have is an empty inning. So you're pretty much locked in to watch what happens. It probably encourages you to stay till the end of the game, because what's the point of starting if you don't finish?
Exactly.
So we talk about how play is scored in our broadcast, and you tend to see actually more women keep score than men at baseball games. But if you want to keep your attention span focused in, grab a Bob Carpenter scorebook and figure out how to keep score, and that'll keep your attention focused, because you got to. Once you start it, you want to finish it.
Exactly, because they say how games can go on for 3 hours, but really there's only 10 to 15 minutes of the ball being in play.
Right.
And so incorporating the excitement and, like you said, keeping score and keeping the fans involved is something that I think will really help this generation of younger kids that want to come in and.
Yeah, I think from the national side of things, I mean, I think I see a lot of families come here, and on the Sunday games, the kids running the bases. So I think it is a good family experience, and certainly as this franchise has grown into a winner, that will only help, because the city has not, it skipped a generation. It went from, it had losing ball clubs in the 60s, and then when the Senators left in 1971, until 2005, you didn't have baseball here. So if you wanted to be a fan, you were probably a fan of the Orioles, or maybe you latched on to the Yankees or the Red Sox or some other team. But now, if you're growing up in this area, you've got the attachment. I've got a team in my own backyard to follow, and now they're a winning team. So I want to keep up how they're doing.
Something we talked about last week in our baseball demographics podcast was that DC is a national city, in a sense that people come here from all over, and there's really not as much of a local culture here as there is in a city like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. So is that reflected in the baseball culture, do you see, that maybe the fan base in DC isn't quite as strong as it would be in one of those more local cities?
Well, what I see is in each and every game, you see a lot of fans of the visiting team, because like you say, they're people who come from out of town, and maybe they've moved here, or they're here from work, and they're from Atlanta, so they're going to come and see the Braves, or they're from Miami, they're going to come see the Marlins, or interleague play. We've always had strong crowds here when the Tigers play here.
Okay.
So I think that's part of it. You see a lot of representation with other fan bases here. Now that as the Nationals have gotten stronger, that tends to be more drowned out by the folks wearing red. I think there's a real passionate group of fans here, but it's probably a smaller number than it is in Boston. I mean, that's my experience from growing up in New England as a Red Sox fan, and there, the sports talk was Red Sox year-round, sprinkling in Patriots if they were doing well, Celtics or Bruins. Here, it's Redskins year-round, sprinkling in the other teams, and baseball can be a great sport to talk about, because there's a game every day, and it's the easiest sport to analyze, and it's so easy to second guess the manager. Well, he brought in the pitcher and he gave up the home run. Why did he bring in that pitcher? Whereas the average fan, they don't know the difference between a cover 2 and a cover 3 defense. Baseball, it's everyone thinks that they know the answer. So, but again, I think because this area skipped a generation, the ins and outs, and appreciating the subtlety of the game that we talked about earlier, that, hey, if you watch the center fielder, he can almost tell you how they're going to pitch. You watch the catcher, how he sets up, how he calls a game. Fans, it takes time to learn those nuances of the game.
I was curious to hear your opinion and what you thought of. There's been a lot of discussion over the last year with Ryan Zimmerman's struggles and his throwing the ball from third to first, and what your thoughts were, and even now taking batting practice out in the outfield, what you think, how he will develop as in a defensive sense.
Well, I mean that remains to be seen. I mean, he's been dealing with injuries. That shoulder, obviously, the the surgery he had prior to last season. 2012, he was basically having to compensate by playing shallow and charging everything to throw down from the side because he couldn't get his arm up elevated to throw over the top.
Yeah.
And I think that created some bad habits in that he, when his shoulder felt better, he almost had to relearn how to throw from over the top. So I think there's probably a mental component to it, but also a physical component, and obviously his shoulder, I think, was still barking at him this year, even over a year after surgery. So probably the long-term answer is that he's not going to be at third base, but for the 2014 Nationals, this team fits together better when he is at third base, because Adam LaRoche is one of your best offensive players, and he can only play first base. Yes. Anthony Rendon has versatility that he can play second or third. If Zimmerman's at third, he can play second.
Yeah.
And obviously when Harper comes back, he's going to be your left fielder, because if Zimmerman's going to play some left field, well, where do you put Harper when he comes back? If you put him in center field, then Span sits, and there's your leadoff hitter. So the pieces of the puzzle fit better together if he's at third base. So I think initially they're concerned about how he can handle throwing the ball with his thumb and how the shoulder responds. So if he does play in left field, that takes a lot of pressure off him having to make maybe 5 or 6 throws across. You might go a game or two and not have a chance in left field. Or if you catch a fly ball, you're just kind of lobbing the ball back in toward the infield. So it's a way for him to work on getting the arm strength up while protecting his shoulder. So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball as to what's going to happen. But right now, they have 2 big holes offensively at second base and in left field. And he fills one of them, either by playing left field or by playing third base and moving Rendon to second base. So it'll just be good to get his bat back in the lineup first and foremost.
One other thing I was going to ask regarding the Nats was Ross Detweiler and how he had been such a key part for the Nats, especially in the playoffs in 2012 and last year in his pitching appearances. But then this year his struggles have really been magnified, just coming in, giving up runs. If there's anything that you have noticed or have heard with how he will develop this season.
Well, I mean, that's been, the bullpen has been outstanding. It leads baseball in ERA, but obviously Detweiler has been the one, piece that hasn't quite clicked in where everyone else has performed well. I think a couple of things. Number one, I think adjustment to the role. He's been primarily a starting pitcher his entire life. Yeah. He's had spurts with the Nationals in the bullpen where he did okay. And I think, again, we talk about the mental thing. I think he still looks at himself as a starting pitcher, which when you're a reliever and you look at yourself as a starter, you look at it as a demotion.
Yeah.
Tyler Clippard has talked about, and Craig Stammen talked to both of them about this, that they both had to make the transition mentally. I'm not a starter anymore. But that's not a bad thing. And Tyler Clippard, he made his Nationals debut in 2008 as a starting pitcher. And if you look at his stats in 2008 in AAA, I believe he went like 6-15 as a starting pitcher, and was not really headed anywhere in the organization. And the next year they converted him to relief in the minor leagues, and it took him a while to embrace the change. And once he did, he had success. And Craig Stammen, he'll still talk about, I'd love to be a starting pitcher, but I think he's accepted that he's been in the big leagues now, you're going on 3 full years without being sent to the minors because he's so good as a reliever. So, I'm sure a part of Ross still feels that, hey, I'm going to be a starter again someday. So he's got to get over that hump that, hey, right now I'm a reliever. And then the issue has been workload. As a starter, he was pitching every 5 days. The way the games have worked out, there have been times where Ross has gone a week or more without pitching.
Yeah.
And that's tough. So then you come in a big spot, your command is not maybe what you'd want it to be, and you're going to give up runs. So it's been one of those things that he's had to suffer because Nationals haven't scored a lot of runs. So the only time he's pitching is when they're getting blown out or when they're blowing people out.
Exactly.
They haven't been blowing people out, so they're playing a lot of close games. And in close games, they're going to go to Clippard, Storen.
Yeah.
Barrett even has had some chances, and obviously Soriano. So it's just he's been a victim of circumstance in a lot of ways.
Yeah. One last question I was going to ask, and I was telling Steve that Michael Pineda was called out for his use of pine tar, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts or anything thinking about if what kind of use that does with baseball?
It's kind of an unwritten thing. It's obviously it's against the rules, but from what I gather, and no, you'll never get anyone to tell you this on the record with the recorder rolling. I get the sense that a lot of pitchers use it, and that it's very helpful with the grip, and that hitters are not upset about it, because if a pitcher doesn't have a good grip, well, there's more likely that one's going to come in at your head when they don't need it to.
Yeah.
So the key is to not be blatant about it. Pineda obviously had it very exposed, and that's kind of flaunting it. If you remember a couple of years ago, it was 2012, Joel Peralta was a pitcher who had been with the Nationals and was pitching for Tampa Bay, and he, apparently when he was here, doctored the baseball. And so he came in a key spot, and Davey Johnson ordered him to be checked. And he was found to have a foreign substance. He was ejected and suspended for 10 games. And I think, Davey looked at it as a competitive, it was a one-run game. Joe Madden wants his pitcher in there. I know he's doing something illegal. I'm going to get him out of there. Well, it turned out the pitcher they brought in, McGee, left-hander who threw 98, got a 1-2-3 inning. Maybe they would have had a better chance against Peralta. But you can be sure that if any Nationals pitcher had anything, they were scrubbing it off, because Madden was going to undress him if he had to. It's a game within the game. I think you see. I was watching Mike Leake. He pitched here the other day. I was watching him on Sunday Night Baseball the other night. He had a big spot on his cap, and it was rosin, but it was a big white spot on his cap. I mean, could someone say something about that? But I think it's kind of everybody does it. So as long as you don't do it openly or overtly, then you can slide with it.
All right.
One last thing, I was wondering, when you travel with the team, do you have much time to explore kind of the different baseball cities around the country? And if so, what kinds of things do you do there when you're on road trips?
Sure. My routine I try to play a lot of golf. I try to work out a lot. But there are cities where I'll explore. San Francisco. I'll ride on the streetcar and go to a Ghirardelli Square, and I've been out the boat ride out to the Golden Gate Bridge. So there are cities where I'll do stuff. The time schedule, you don't always have a whole lot of time, knowing that right around 2:30 to 3 o'clock you've got to get your game face on and get toward the bus to get to the ballpark. So that kind of thing we can do on off days if we have off days in cities, and also if my family is there, then I'll tend to do more of that stuff. If I'm by myself, I probably do less of it, just not wanting to go. I tend to be someone who likes to travel in groups. I'd rather go do something with a few other people rather than just, hey, I'm just going to go off and explore by myself today. That's not generally something I do, but we keep busy and the time goes.
All right, sounds good.
All right,
That's all you got?
Is there anything else you like? Any tips for us as we progress in our podcasting and broadcasting career? Anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, it sounds like if you guys are willing to go out there and sit on a hill and broadcast JV baseball, you're serious about it. The one thing that that I did coming up through high school and into college was I tried to do everything. Whether any experience on air is good experience. Whether it's doing a high school girls field hockey game or with two people there. It's any experience you can get on the air is helpful. Any sort of, whether it's radio work, even if it's doing news, weather, any experience to get on the air, you'll benefit. You'll better to make mistakes at a low level and get better, and work through your mistakes and just kind of get rid of the tension that goes with, hey, I'm on the air, there's a microphone on, I'm talking to people are listening. Just to have a comfort level in front of a microphone, that takes time to develop. And I listened back to the stuff that I did in college, and I thought I was good, but I listened back now, I really wasn't very good. So it was good to be able to make some mistakes at that level.
All right.
Well, Dave Jageler, it was a pleasure to have you on with us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So Dave Jageler, the Nationals radio broadcaster, being our guest on the program this week, Paul was able to set up that sweet interview with him over Twitter, and Dave was supposed to meet us at Nationals Park right by the Masson broadcast booth at about 4:30 when the park opened. So we walked in there, and we were ready to meet Dave Jageler, and we see him walking up, and we introduce ourselves, and Dave, both Dave and Rich, the guests from last episode, were incredibly friendly, especially for kind of their standing in the baseball media world. They're both professional guys, both great at what they do, and they were both so friendly and welcoming to two amateurs like us. So it was great meeting Dave. But then kind of what happened next was an interesting story. So Paul's here to talk about that.
Yes, and I'd first like to thank Dave. If you're listening to this, I'd really like to thank you. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and really appreciate getting to talk to you and hearing what you had to say and answering our questions. But the one story I thought was funny was we walked up and introduced ourselves, and we were trying to decide where we wanted to do the interview. And with the music being kind of loud in the background, as you can kind of hear, we weren't sure exactly where the best location would be to do the interview. And so it also, just to clarify this, it had also just poured down rain. So all the seats are wet. So the ushers had to have the towels to be able to dry the seats off. So Steve and I say, well, how about we sit right here in these cushioned seats, and that way we can be comfortable and be able to talk and have a good, nice, long interview and not have to worry about others around us. And so we go up to the usher and we say, we ask him, can you dry off these seats real quick? And Dave is standing behind the usher, so the usher's only looking at Steve and I. And the usher looks at Steve, and he sees Steve's Marlins hat, and he goes, now, why would I do that for a Marlins fan?
I'm not sure you said that, but that was the look in his eyes.
That was, yeah, well, okay, I should clarify that. He looked at us like, now you expect me to do this for a Marlins fan? And of course, I don't mean to say anything bad about the Nationals Park employees, because he was very, very open to doing it after. But I think what was funny was that he then looked at me and said, well, okay, at least you're a Nats fan. And he said, but are you even sitting in this section? And I pointed to Dave, and I said, we're doing an interview. And he goes, oh, excuse me. And he saw Dave, and he goes, I've seen you before. He goes, you sit up there and broadcast the games. I've seen you on the big screen. He goes, let me just clean off these seats for you real quick here. I'd be glad to help you all out. You want me to shut off this area here so make sure it's all private? You guys, you got it. You guys, I got you set up right here. I'll be glad to do that. Thank you very much. And I was like, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So this usher's kind actions helped us get this interview with Dave, and we were able to sit down with him for, I don't know, maybe half an hour.
It was
35 minutes. It was a good length interview.
A half hour.
So Dave, thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed our conversation with Dave Jageler. Be sure to be on the lookout in the next few weeks for some more interesting podcasts and interviews. With that, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Top Step.